Hi, and welcome to Instavision with Glenn Reynolds. And I'm joined today by Stephen Pressfield. He's the author of Gates of Fire, a novel of the Spartans at Thermopylae, of Killing Rommel, a novel of World War II. I hope I don't give away the ending too much when I say Rommel doesn't die, but I guess people probably know that much if they know anything about World War II. And the Afghan Campaign, a novel about war in Afghanistan, but involving Alexander the Great, as opposed to what's going on there now. Thanks for joining me, Steve. It's really great to have you here. I'm a huge fan ever since I read Gates of Fire, and I know our own Bill Whittle was so excited that you were in the studio.
Yeah, Bill.
So it's just, yeah, it's great to have you here.
Thanks a lot, Glenn.
So,
Thanks.
So you're also blogging.
Thanks for having me. I am blogging. I'm following in your footsteps, and you know, maybe in a little different angle, but trying to do what you're doing.
So, you know, one of the interesting things I noticed, I actually found Gates of Fire, it was after September 11th, and a lot of my readers started recommending it to me. And you know, it's interesting because, of course, at one level, it has nothing at all to do with what's going on now. But at another level, it does. And I think a lot of people were interested in it. Do you think there's sort of been a rebirth of interest in the martial virtues in the last several years?
I think there has, Glenn, and you know, I've gotten a lot of correspondence from Marines and Special Forces and Army guys in Iraq and Afghanistan, and I think part of it is that the wars that we're fighting these days are sort of so dubious morally and acting in such a gray ethical area that particularly the people, the young men and women who have to fight them, are trying to find, looking for some sort of code of warrior conduct, a warrior ethos or something that will make them kind of feel like they're on solid ground a little more than they may be. And I think that's one of the reasons why this story of the Spartans at Thermopylae rings, you know, so true to them these days.
Well, you know, it's interesting to me to see that it seems to me across sort of a wide field, there's been a lot more interest in this sort of thing. In science fiction, for example, the sort of subgenre of military science fiction has really exploded.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And it just sort of, you know, seems sort of interesting to me because I think in the 90s, we were taking kind of a long holiday from history, and people weren't nearly as interested in this sort of thing. And then, boom, history came back, and, well, of course, in your case, the novels are historical. And what got you interested in writing novels based on military history?
Oh, that's a very good question. I mean, my first novel, which came out in '95, was The Legend of Bagger Vance, which was a golf story. And that just sort of got me into the world of writing novels. I had been doing screenplays before that. And so I had to come up with a follow-up, but I had no idea what I was going to write about. But I always loved the story of the Battle of Thermopylae. I've read it many times in Herodotus and in other sources, and so it just sort of seized me at the time. And when I did that, my publisher wanted me to do another, and the next thing I knew, I had done, you know, 5 novels all set in ancient Greece. So it certainly was nothing planned. It just kind of turned out that way, but it seemed to be a métier that I'm comfortable in and that I really like.
Yeah, it's actually interesting to me because I thought when I read Gates of Fire that you were somebody who'd spent a lot of time in scholarship of the Greek world because you seem so familiar with so many details and it rang so true, and of course the reviews were all good. But it was really something you picked up for that project and the successor novels.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's sort of like the research that I do is kind of like sinking a probe into the earth. I don't have a great broad understanding of the ancient world, but in certain areas I've really dug really deep. Kind of like each book to me is a little bit like doing a PhD thesis. You just have really immerse yourself in it and you become an expert in that one area, and even areas right just around it you might not know anything about.
You know, one thing that sort of interested me is about the Greeks, and you saw this, of course, with the movie 300 and some other things. It seems to me that Western civilization often looks to the Greeks when we're a little uncertain about what we're doing now. That we are sort of looking back to our roots. And there's also something fascinating about the Greeks because, you know, at one level they're sort of seen as the pinnacle of rationality, but at another level they had a savage side, which they were actually fairly comfortable with in a way that I think moderns are not so comfortable with.
That's very true.
You know, one of my friends talks about getting in touch with your inner Klingon is sort of the same kind of thing. But you know, do you think that's right?
I think there's a lot to that. I mean, particularly, I mean, the Greeks were certainly the first democracies, so that is one of the reasons why we can relate to them. And Athens and Sparta were both empires in their own way at different times. So we can relate to that too. And then again, of course, we are a Western society. This ancient Greece is really our roots. Rationality, Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, Thucydides, Herodotus, all of that stuff is really where we spring from, as much as from England and from the Enlightenment. And you're right, the Greeks, particularly Alexander, had a really, I don't know if I'd call it a dark side, but certainly a very much of a tribal, visceral side that we can also relate to, because we've got that too in the, USA #1 type of mentality that we can get into sometimes.
Well, and of course they were pre-Christian too, so you don't have that whole sort of Christian pacifism strain. I mean, there weren't a whole lot of Greek pacifists, were there? That wasn't a big
nobody
thing.
was holding back in those days. I mean, it was considered the honorable thing to conquer whoever you could conquer.
In fact, people often forget that Socrates was something of a war hero himself.
He was.
And of course, he makes something of an appearance as well. Well, you've branched out now into blogging, and your blog's kind of an interesting blog. You're sort of interspersing things about writing and writing advice. I saw you think about how you did rewrite on a porn flick and what you learned from that, which I thought was pretty cool.
Today. Yeah, that's today.
Yeah, and that's kind of fun. And then in between that, you've got interviews with Afghan tribal leaders and special forces people fighting there and things like that. And how do you manage that mix? How's that working out for you?
I'd like to ask you, because it certainly isn't easy. I don't know how you manage it. I see you're just blogging, from 9:58, 9:59, 10:01. But I started this blog about, I don't know, maybe 3 months ago. I really just wanted to, Afghanistan and the situation over there today is something of a real issue for me, particularly because of a couple of books that I wrote about Alexander the Great that really convinced me, Alexander the Great in Afghanistan, fighting the same places, same kind of war that we're fighting today. And what really struck me from that research was how big the tribal aspect and tribalism was in those days, and I believe that it really is again today. But I don't see it being mentioned anywhere. I saw that 60 Minutes piece the other night with General McChrystal. I saw Fareed Zakaria do an entire hour on Afghanistan. You read things, an entire issue of Newsweek just about related to it, and you don't see the word tribe in there ever. So I kind of started, I did 5 little videos just as a kind of a concerned citizen. I'm not making any money on it. In fact, it's costing me money. And I just thought I would just sort of put them out on the web, like on YouTube. But I've discovered, as I'm sure you know, Glenn, that it doesn't work that way. Once you get something out there, you have to kind of keep coming back to it and keep bringing people to your site and what you're doing. So it's sort of like Topsy. This site kind of grew, and now I'm doing. I have right now I have an ongoing interview with Chief Ajmal Khan Zazai, who is a real Afghan tribal chief in Paktia province. We're doing probably a 10-part interview, his side of the story. And I also have a piece called One Tribe at a Time from my really good friend, Major Jim Gant of the Special Forces, who did 2 tours over in Afghanistan in Konar province. And he has a plan, his own. He wrote a 55-page white paper, like I said, about what he would do if he were in charge of American policy in Afghanistan. And so I'm kind of serializing that each Monday on the blog. A lot of work, but it's really good. Both of them are really good. And then I have another book that I wrote called The War of Art, which is about writing. And that has generated a lot of response on tweeting or whatever that thing is. So I've done a thing called Writing Wednesdays, where each Wednesday I do a little piece about writing. And today it's talking about a porn film I once worked on and some of the things that I learned from that. So yeah, it's been quite an adventure. Keeps me away from doing my real work.
Well, I actually think that's a good thing. My theory is, and this is really my theory of blogging, is it's a theory of sort of productive procrastination. My theory is you're going to procrastinate a certain amount with any big project, no matter what you do. So the goal is not to avoid procrastination, because that's not going to work. It's to turn your procrastination into something productive too. And that's sort of how I got into blogging.
That's pretty good, yeah. Yeah.
I used to warm up to work on law review articles or something by going and writing a book review or a product review on Amazon or something. You know, it's sort of like cracking your knuckles.
Is that how you started, Glenn? How did you start at getting into
Kind of, yeah, I guess. You know, that's one of the things that started me. And Slate magazine's The Fray was another, and it was the same sort of thing. Sort of a little warm up, get you to sit down at the computer, which is like, you know, the most important part of writing is to put your butt in the chair.
Exactly.
And you had a post on that, didn't you, I think?
I did. I actually borrowed from a really wonderful book by Patricia Ryan Madsen, who was a great drama and improv teacher at Stanford. And she wrote a book called Improv Wisdom, which is sort of what you can learn from improv. And one of her great principles is just show up, which is exactly what you said. Put your butt in the chair and good things start to happen.
Well, see, one of the things is you're writing a book or an article, it's a lot of pressure when you put your butt in the chair. So you tell yourself, I'm going to put my butt in the chair and I'll write a blog post. And then by the time you're done with a blog post, you're already at the computer, and now inertia is working for you, right? You're right there, and you might as well do some work, because now it would be work to get out of the chair.
I agree with that.
That's my theory.
In fact, one of the things that I do is I will do, like, my first hour in the chair, I'll do research for that hour. I'll sort of transcribe from books that I've dog-eared and everything, and write in files the very stuff I'm working on. It really kind of warms me up. I don't know, did you ever read a thing called Journal of a Novel by John Steinbeck? Have you ever heard of that, Glenn?
No, I haven't read that.
It's a great book. It's like while he was writing, I forget which novel, each day before he would start, as a warm-up, he would write this little journal. And he would talk, he was living in New York at the time with his wife, Elaine, and he would kind of talk about, oh, they went to this play or that party, or he thought about this, or he had the problems with that. And he would just do it for an hour, and it just kind of warmed him up. And I really recommend it to any writer who is trying to kind of get themselves going. Journal of a Novel by John Steinbeck. It's out of print, but I'm sure you can find it on any kind of used book site.
That's really interesting, and I think actually a lot of writers use blogs or Facebook or Twitter or something. The danger is, of course, at some point you have to stop the blogging and the tweeting and the Facebooking and actually then work on what you really sat down to work on.
That's that terrible moment,
Yeah, it's pretty good. Well, now, you have a lot of readers. In fact, I was looking, and your books are not only used at the Naval War College in West Point and Annapolis, but they're also on the Commandant's reading list for Marines. So you probably have a lot of military readers out there following your blog and stuff now.
Yeah, to my sort of amazement, yes. Yeah, there are a lot of people who really like those books. Like I say, I think a lot of my books are really about the warrior ethos, and I think that those of our young men and women who are serving, that's kind of, I don't know if it's really taught to them in the particular training that they get, so they respond to it wherever they can find it.
You know, yeah, I think that's a really interesting role of culture, and I think it's a whole area of sort of writing that's outside the usual appreciation of the people who study literature and things like that. I actually have heard that W.E.B. Griffin's military novels are really popular with the troops.
Oh, they really are, yeah.
They take his history as true, which is sometimes right and sometimes not, because they're novels, you know, but that it's, again, sort of imbuing an ethos and a sense of history and community through literature.
Exactly, yeah.
The sort of thing that would be a lot of courses at Harvard if it were involving peasants in Tuscany, but since it's Marines, it doesn't get that kind of
That's
attention,
right, that's right. It's a stepchild form of literature.
Well, you know, as we move on, what else do you think people out there should be reading? Do you have any recommendations, other than obviously the entire corpus of Steven Pressfield novels, for what PJTV viewers might want to look at in this area?
You know, I'm a real, when I do my reading, it's almost always research on something that I'm working on. So I'm really kind of not too up on a lot of the most current stuff. Like my reading habits are I practically never read novels, even though that's all I write. I read almost always memoirs and nonfiction stuff, history particularly. So, but I can't have, I don't have any, I'm reading one really interesting book by Seth Godin now called Tribes. Are you familiar with that one? That's a little bit about blogging.
I'm familiar with him, but not with that book.
Yeah, it's a really good book. It's about how, it's kind of like tweeting and all that sort of stuff, and the way nowadays, there are so many people who are sort of leaders of little tribes. In a way, anybody that blogs kind of does that. So it's a really good book, Tribes by Seth Godin, G-O-D-I-N. And Patricia Ryan Madsen's Improv Wisdom is another book I'd really recommend.
Well, that's great, Jim. Now that it seems like whenever I ask novelists for recommendations, they recommend nonfiction books. So I guess I'm going to have to get the nonfiction people on to recommend some novels. I don't know.
It's true. You know, I think there's a real reason for that, Glenn, and I think it is that, you know, a novelist has his own voice, you know, for each specific book. And if I start reading like a really good novelist that has a very strong voice, it can screw me up. You know, it's like passing by a planet with a very heavy gravitational field. You know, your spaceship starts, you know, whirring off to the side. So I don't even want to expose myself to too good a voice, and I don't want to read crap. So I wound up reading, you know, nonfiction and history.
That's really funny. Yeah, I can see that because I know when I want to give my own writing a tune-up. Of course, I don't write novels, so it doesn't matter. But I'll often, I have a few writers I like to read. I like to read Mark Twain or Arthur Leff or various people who write in a really good style, and it jazzes me up. But if I were writing a novel, I guess I'd be afraid maybe it would be contagious.
Yeah, it is. It is. Unless, although it also helps, as you say, to read people that write in a style you like and that you feel comfortable with, and that kind of echoes yours or that you aspire to. That, you know, I think that's what you're talking about, Glenn. It helps.
Well, that's what good writing is all about, and I appreciate you taking the time to stop in and talk with us about it. Thanks so much for joining us here.
Hey, Glenn, it's a real pleasure. I've been admiring your work for a long time. Thank you very much for having me on here. It's quite an operation you got. I'm very impressed, and thanks very much for having me.
Well, thank you for coming, and I'm actually jealous. I've never been to the PJTV LA studios, so people come in and I hear how great it looks, and I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I've never been there.
It's pretty nice.
Yeah, and although there are no angry Persian warriors there, so that's
true.
You know, something I got here in Knoxville that you don't have. Well, thank you so much, and you can see Steven Pressfield's books at his website, StevenPressfield.com, where you can also see his blog and learn everything from how to write sex scenes that advance the story to how to deal with Afghan tribes. So thanks so much for coming in, and we'll talk to you guys later.
Thanks again, Glenn.